Hi everyone, and welcome to the Generalist, where security practitioners come to look beyond niches, silos, egos, and expand their professional comfort zones. My name is Ilya Umanskiy. So this is episode 5, where I'd like to talk to you about convergence. And pose a question whether this convergence that we're all seeing around us or discussing is real or is just a facade, and we have much more of the journey to complete in order to really see great benefits from what convergence can offer. My first question actually is, if we are looking to converge, did we diverge at some point? But that's something for you to think about. Nonetheless, convergence, in my view, is actually taking the spectrum of protection measures. Some of you may think that we would be looking at physical side and then the cyber side, right? And really abandoning both physical and cyber and saying, okay, well, let's use and leverage these protection measures and different resources in order to accomplish optimal protection for the assets that we consider to be mission critical. And so I think that it really goes beyond just saying, oh, we're going to put video surveillance on the corporate network. That's not really convergence, to be honest with you. I think convergence can be achieved if we are actually, in a smart way, picking one product or one platform to manage all our signal. And then enhancing the skill sets of security operators to actually be able to look across various signals, be it whether they're coming from, let's say, the domain, as we like to call it, of physical security, or the domain of cybersecurity, and make prudent judgment and help senior leaders in asset protection make prudent judgments about protecting mission critical assets. So that's kind of my take on what I believe convergence can be, and I'll give you some ideas for kind of how that can work. But the question now is, like, who can afford convergence? Can small to medium businesses afford it? What would it look like? We see that there's a lot of talk and investment into, let's say, physical access control platforms or video surveillance platforms that are now residing off premises in the cloud. Is that convergence? Really? Who's managing it? Do we still have two different functions? Or do we even have functions that can possibly manage it? Or if we look at medium to small enterprises, who there can be competent enough to actually look at these protection solutions more than just plug and play, which is what I see in reality. So a lot of small and medium enterprises actually just buy these things just to plug and play, tick boxes, and just say that, yeah, we have access control and video surveillance. At the same time, they also have, let's say, an IT function, or if they're lucky, a data protection function, which it operates primarily independently and looks for a completely different set of resources besides your video surveillance and access control. So I sense that small to medium enterprises at the moment are not really in the position to play this convergence game. So what about large enterprises, right? There's a lot of talk and there's a lot of demonstrations of convergence by large enterprises. But then the question is, how does that really work in reality of day-to-day operations? For example, can a signal from one, let's say, that's looking at one asset, be competently assessed by people who are cross-trained in protecting protection of data and protection of tangible assets. Does that happen? Can a single platform be used to really assess a multitude of different signals within the same graphical user interface? Is that what's happening? So really, at the end of the day, I feel that we're looking at an industry that has still, unfortunately, two sides. On the one side, we have products that are primarily geared toward protection of data, and they support people who are in the cyber domain. On the other side, we have great developments, but nonetheless, in its own stream of products that help protect assets and help support teams in the physical domain. The convergence part, it seems to me, is taking place when people are saying, well, we're going to move our technology for, let's say, from the physical domain, we're going to move it off premises into the cloud. Or we're going to try to ask our IT department to give us better platforms and standardize our, let's say, information technology infrastructure to support, let's say, the physical security platforms. All that's well and good, but this has been going on for a long time. It's not news to large organizations that you can actually go and ask IT for extra servers or extra bandwidth or extra space in data centers. The real question today is what is happening between the two functions within enterprises. What is CISO doing and what is CSO doing? And how are they collaborating together to close gaps of analysis, close gaps of understanding, and then risk management as a single mind to help executives with risk-conscious decision making and meeting of different business objectives. So do we see convergence between the CISOs and the CSOs in large enterprises? On the one hand, we could see a lot of reports where those two functions and those two leaders are working together, and the teams seem to be sharing a lot of information, and sometimes they even have converged command and control centers. But where is the signal coming from, and what is it coming to? I suspect, and based on my experience, I see still that the software platforms are different, and they're installed by different companies and made by different companies. Therefore, skill sets are still not aligned, and staffs are not cross-trained to operate across different platforms, particularly between cyber and physical domain. So I see that still being a challenge. I still see that some enterprises simply choose to have, if they do have two functions, have their own separate data security command and control function, and then they have a separate physical security command and control function. Well, how is the information between those two signal aggregating and signal analyzing facilities happen? How do they exchange information? To what level? So I have concerns that we are really using the term convergence without having to set certain parameters of what should convergence look like, right? And unfortunately, like I said, the industry isn't ready from the manufacturer's perspective, from the integrator's perspective. I mean, go ask a video surveillance or an access control integrator to go and help you set up a CM, okay, and see what their answer will be. If you can find some, please list them in the comments under this video. I welcome for you to do that. And so what are we converging at the end of the day, and how are we doing it, really deserves a lot more scrutiny. So now let me share with you what I think could be some points, some factors to consider when you're contemplating what convergence how it can be beneficial for your organization and how to set it up. So I feel like without understanding what we're protecting, namely assets, we can't proceed. So I think it's extremely important to first take the exercise of understanding across the board what are the mission critical assets, and they can't be isolated under, let's say, the realm of cyber and under the realm of physical. I think it's very important to understand what those assets are across the board. So that can then start informing this risk management analysis of looking at the vulnerabilities that exist around those assets, protection measures, of course, that exist around those assets, and then what threats and threat actors and their capabilities that could exist that then could inform, I guess, your understanding of risks to assets. So that's still just the beginning of your undertaking. You still need to understand how to align risks with business objectives and therefore inform senior leadership of the organization to help them be more risk-conscious decision makers, and to also help them understand how a certain risk could affect negatively some business objectives. So then it becomes a little bit more obvious where you would draw some signal, where could you start measuring and monitoring certain negative or potential negative ramifications to risk-conscious decision making and business objectives. And that also is still part of the process, because then it's important to understand how are you leveraging resources that are available from the industry in order to create a more of a holistic monitoring platform, a signal management platform, so that you can cross-train personnel, you can really understand signal across the board. And only then it's important to complete this journey to help align what you receive from the signal management platform and what analytics what patterns you're able to see. Again, without having to think, oh, I'm only looking at cyber, I'm only looking at physical. Really looking across the board. Then really the resources that you're using and where they're located really becomes a function of, okay, what's my uptime? Do I care that this resource, this software is, let's say, manufactured by a company that doesn't understand anything about cyber or data protection, and why am I not leveraging, let's say, a more holistic software? Can I move away from, let's say, just an access control platform? Can I buy it as a module of a different software package that is far more comprehensive and can help me look at assets across the board, be it data assets or my let's call them physical assets, tangible assets. And so alignment of that, let's say, more comprehensive platform with organizations' expectations and what processes exist in organizations then helps inform senior leadership with a more comprehensive and let's call it a holistic view from the signal that you're receiving. Okay, it could be a signal from a video surveillance camera, it could be a signal from, let's say, a port on a server, it could be a signal from a firewall, and so on and so forth. All of that creates a better understanding how mission critical assets are being affected, how they're being protected, and so that you can then help enterprises' senior leadership make decisions relative to business objectives, because then they'll understand how their business objectives are being affected. To give it an example, I was recently working with an organization, and particularly with their data protection function, where we spent a lot of time talking about how data and information in general is being protected, until we got to the point where the team within that function forgot to look. They went to their facilities management team, and we had a very nice discussion with them, very useful, where facilities management team told us that they're putting in different access control and video surveillance platforms across the enterprise, and that the scale of those platforms is only increasing. And it was one question that unfortunately stopped everyone in their tracks when we said, well, are you aligning the specifications and performance requirements and also the hardening, the asset hardening for those systems with expectations of the information security team and data protection operations? So the answer was a pause. There was no clear understanding of, if you use an IP camera and you put it on the network, and that IP camera happens to be poorly designed and has a backdoor, and then that exposes the network, there was no understanding that with the scale of implementation deployment on that side, that presented a real danger, a real issue for the folks on the data protection side. So is that convergence? If we just simply have that discussion, wouldn't there have to be a slight reallocation of responsibility and maybe infusion of better standards for how to even design and deploy video surveillance and access control technologies or other peripheral technologies? So it doesn't appear that that conversation ever happened. So that is where I feel like there's so many moving parts that if you simply throw some access control and video surveillance on the cloud, and that's been sanctioned by your IT department, and maybe you have, let's say, achieved a good relationship in meetings with the cybersecurity function, that's not really a good explanation of a converged enterprise, because you're still missing a lot of signal, and that signal is not being reviewed in a holistic manner. So what could be some use cases? Let's start with small enterprises, small operations. And I would qualify them as being anything under like 50 people, really. So it's really a small business. They'd be lucky if they could buy products from a single supplier that could accommodate both their information protection, data protection, and protection of their tangible assets, their physical space and their physical location. I've yet to find a single solution that can be supplied by a single integrator to accommodate that. So if I go to an integrator, I say, please install all of those points, and the answer will be, no, we can only accommodate, or I should say, the answer will likely be that they can only accommodate video surveillance and access control and the peripheral systems that come with it. Or on the other hand, an integrator could say, yeah, sure, we can implement, let's say, firewalls, we could help you set up, let's say, monitoring systems for data protection, for protecting ones and zeros and computer systems and network. But likely the same integrator would have a challenging time unless they sub it out to install systems like access control and video surveillance. The same happens with products. So a good use case would actually be to start with a system that helps simply protect the office space, to try to get some signals into the hands of, let's say, either if they have an IT administrator or an admin, or just an admin, like an office function, to get those signals delivered to that individual or a group of individuals in an understandable format, and they could also see those signals coming from, let's say, a network and a computer system, that there could be some problems with that, and also understand how their physical space is protected, and change in simple ways the state of that protection, considering what concerns they may have, what threats they may be experiencing. So that's kind of the use case for a small business. They really won't be able to implement much more than that. And so if we move to medium-sized businesses, anything like from 50 people and with maybe multiple locations, a few locations somewhere, and let's say up to 500 people, I would say that it is likely they'll have an IT function, and it would be great if that IT function could be a single channel for procurement of both network and information and data protection solutions, as well as things like video surveillance, access control, visitor management, and so on. And I think they would be driving, to some degree, some interfaces where they could look at ways in which they can look at signal across the board. I would really see that as a very useful exercise. No longer do we have to worry then about if we're, let's say, if a person is leaving the organization, their IT access or network access is being removed, and very simply we can then terminate their physical access card, and that happens with a click of a single button. If that can be achieved by an IT department in a medium-sized operation, that would be wonderful. And that could set up an example for how to actually manage and leverage different resources that unfortunately today are being manufactured and installed by two different groups of organizations, of manufacturers and integrators. So then that takes us to the large enterprise. And my view for how a large enterprise could actually achieve a level of convergence. And again, as I said, all of this really is predicated on the ability to define and understand mission-critical assets, understand vulnerabilities, threats, and therefore risks. And that homework needs to be done well in advance. Then obviously understanding of business objectives and so on. But large enterprises could start with where I mentioned medium enterprises would be, but then start thinking about user behavior analytics, like really more of a real-time management and understanding of what's happening on the network, what is happening in terms of pedestrian circulation and vehicle circulation at their facilities, what kind of access requests are coming through, what are some deviations, what are some anomalies, patterns, trends, and so on. That could be certainly supported with systems like visitor management and video surveillance, and signal from all of that traffic would then be analyzed by a single team where they would be cross-trained on those platforms. The trouble is, again, that we don't really have a single platform that can serve that purpose. I hope that one would be developed and really tested and presented to enterprises. The trouble still exists with really moving away from existing products, because it's very difficult if you're a large enterprise with multiple facilities and let's say you've standardized on an access control system for facility access, and let's say you have a separate access control system for network access. It's very difficult to take those systems, abandon them, and then use a converged system, or integrate those systems at the back end. Some enterprises do that, but that is really still just kind of a one-off, if you will. It's not a trend. So in addition to user behavior analytics, as I said to you, understanding and more specifically being able to change the state, the protection state for different parts of the enterprise, or let's say for one office versus another, depending on what threats are understood and what threats are pertinent, could happen across the two domains. So it doesn't just have to happen on the cyber side if there's a cyber threat, but that cyber threat could actually influence the way physical access is treated and the way physical access is controlled for various facilities. So it's important to consider that a converged platform would give signal at any part of that asset spectrum or threat spectrum, and therefore the state of protection could be changed across the board between network security and physical security. So I hope that from within the large enterprise, if we're able to achieve this state of convergence where the protection state for a variety of assets can be changed uniformly from one location by one team, then hopefully that team, that enterprise, that organization will be able to influence the industry and go back and say, here's what we've been able to accomplish. Let's talk to the integrators, let's talk to manufacturers and really share with them how a converged system works. Because I really feel that the more of such cases we see, the more we will see that manufacturers and integrators will begin to think more across the board and not just within their domains. I hope this has been useful. I know that it raises a lot of questions, and unfortunately, within the short confines of this talk, it's difficult to give you very extensive examples. But I really hope that you don't treat convergence just for the word that is being thrown around, and you really start thinking about those things that matter to each enterprise, which is assets, vulnerabilities, risk management, alignment with business objectives. It's very important. Ability of senior managers, as senior leaders, to make risk-conscious decision making. Risk-conscious decisions, and how our protection systems uniformly help inform those decisions. What kind of information are we able to produce, or intelligence are we able to produce from converged systems, if we can achieve that? So I leave you with these thoughts. I hope that some commentary will come through, maybe some questions or some suggestions to look at maybe products that are coming up in the industry that are that appear to support this convergence trend, and also I will welcome for you to challenge me, to point to maybe recent examples of how convergence is happening and what that looks like. I think it will be useful for the rest of the community. Well, as always, thank you very much for your attention, and please stay safe.